attendance, council members, Marty, Ireland, 06Mar23, Mr. Sneed, Mr. Hook, and myself. At the January 30th meeting, we spoke to Frank Silva, the chief building official. He led me to believe there were some questions with our ordinances. So the reason I'm calling this meeting is to address those ordinances to help Mr. Silva do his job better, and so we don't have this problem again. On January 30th, we spoke about 14 Lincoln Way East. He said it was inspected 10 months ago, and a citation was issued. The owners were in the process of fixing the building when it collapsed. Mr. Silva said that the building has been a shell since the fire of 2009 on Easter Sunday. The building does not have electric or heat, and he referred to it, we need some sort of white box ordinance. So those are some of the questions I have for Mr. Silva. And some of the things that we need to deal with. So, Mr. Silva, will you please come up here, please? Thank you.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Mr.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for coming. On January 30th, you made some comments about some of the ordinances, and we just wanted to address some of those.
Sure.
So my first question is, what are some of the issues from your perspective with the ordinances?
Well, can I first say something here?
Yes, absolutely.
I wrote some things down here because I want to make sure everything gets said that needs to be said.
Okay.
You know, as a building official, we're at a crossroads in the downtown area right now. We've been at a crossroads down there. With many of the downtown historical buildings, most of these buildings are over 100 years old, 100, 120, 130 years old. And at this point, most of them need restored, if not all of them. They need preserved, or they're not going to last. For us to move forward, we need to move from just maintaining our buildings to the minimum standards to investing and restoring them. You know, there's companies that do this specialized restoration that will make these buildings last another 50 or 100 years. You know, Kuhn Caulking, those type of companies do that type of restoration. That's what those buildings need. However, these types of restorations cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Just think what the McClymonds building would cost to restore it, you know. For the most part, these restorations are not being done, and that needs to change if we want to maintain the character of the downtown buildings. You know, if I can get one point across tonight, it's this. After 100 years of these buildings have to be preserved and restored. That's currently not happening. I can't make a restore building. I can't force them to put hundreds of thousands of dollars in these buildings to save them. You can't do it either. So we've got to come up with a way that we can restore these buildings. You know, let me give you a couple of examples of owners who's restored buildings. Chloe's. You guys all been enclosed. That building's been restored. The stone house up the road up there, that building's been restored. 59 Duncan across the street was restored about 20 years ago. You know, they put new windows in, they put new electric, new plumbing, new heating in, and it's still in pretty good shape. It was restored. It was preserved. Okay, to accompany the goals of moving our downtown forward, we must identify the pieces to the puzzle and put them together. First and foremost, we must have incentives to the property owners to either invest in the buildings or sell. To owners who are willing to make investments needed. That can be done in a variety of ways, and we are currently working to revising several of the ordinances. As a building official, it's my responsibility to make sure the buildings in our city are safe and maintained. If you ask me today if there are any buildings in imminent danger of collapse, I'd say no, because I know of none. The recent situation at 14 and 20 Lincoln Way was very uncharacteristic. And the situation with 125 and 129 Tiger Rags over there, that's been an ongoing issue for years, and unfortunately that could not be fixed. At 14, which was the bait shop, next to the original Bonnie's, we did have a citation there, and I had ordered a structural engineer to look at the back of that building, and I got plans, and they were approved from a structural engineer, and they were in the process of doing the repair when the buildings collapsed. You know, when we ordered the buildings down, we consulted an architect, a structural engineer, and a restoration expert. I spent a half a day up there with those guys trying to save those buildings, and there was just no way to save them. You know, I just want to spend a minute and give you an overview of the current procedures when we issue a citation. I provided, I think you guys got a handout, but first of all, it's a verbal, you know, we talk to them and tell them about the citation. Then we send a notice of violation in the mail, and then we send if it's still not corrected, we send it certified, and then we have a non-compliance notice and a final notice. I'll tell you this, for the most part, with the building owners, they're compliant. When we write a citation, they fix it. But we get the minimum. We get a Band-Aid quote. That's all we get. And the citation's cleared up, and okay, this process is required as part of our ordinance. We are currently looking at this to maybe streamline it and bring recommendations for it as part of our revision. On a positive note, in 2018, our downtown was given a National Register of Historical Building designation, allowing for federal tax credits, which gives building owners, investors, a tool for the preservation, restoration, and redevelopment of the downtown buildings. Related to that, in 2017, we updated design guidelines for the Downtown Historical District, and copies of those guidelines are available in the building and on our website. So that's a tool right there. Building owners can get 40–50% tax credits on these buildings if they invest in them. That's one tool. And finally, the unfortunate situation these past several weeks is really a wake-up call for all of us to reinforce our efforts and find a path that will move us forward in the downtown core. As a building official, I'm committed to doing what it takes to make that happen. That includes working with all of you. Working with Imagine Downtown Focus Group, working with the administration, working with Chamber of Commerce, whoever. This will not be an easy task. It will take effort from all of us, the stakeholders, funding, and changes to our ordinances. There's no time to look back. The work and effort needs to be done in the next months or years ahead to save these buildings. Okay, that's all I have.
In the ordinance 1307.06A, it says a reasonable time to give the property owners to fix their violations? What is the reasonable amount of time that we give those?
Well, it all depends on the citations. I mean, if it's something we feel is life safety, they get 10 days. If it's at 14, take that for example. The back of that building blew out. Okay, well, it popped out. We got prints from a structural engineer, but there was nothing there that looked like it was in imminent danger of collapsing. We even had a structural engineer look at that wall. And, you know, he drew up a fix for it, and we issued the permit. They got 6 months on the permit. Now, if it would have been more severe, then we would have given them the 10 days, but they were working on it at the time. So to answer your question, it all depends on the severity of the citation.
Okay, thank you. Now, as far as 14, the damage done to that building was due to the fire in 2009?
No, 14 was the old vape shop,
Okay.
and they had a fire in there. That wasn't,
The fire was next door in Easter of 2009?
right, that was in the old Bonnie's,
Okay.
the original Bonnie's, but the vape shop was only like 5 or 7 years ago when they had that.
So how did that process work? I mean, we're looking going on 14 years later. You said 6 months, and then what's the process? What's the step after that? If they're not in compliance?
If they don't comply, then we take them to the local board of building appeals. Okay. If they don't comply there, they can appeal it to the state board. If not, it goes to the law director from that point on. And rarely do we have to do that. I mean, usually we get compliance from the owners, but we get that Band-Aid. Again, we get the minimum. That's all we get. We don't get the restoration we need.
Thank you. My next question is, when was the last time we summoned a business owner into court for any of these violations?
You talking residential or
We're
commercial?
talking about commercial. Have we ever summoned a business owner or building owner into court for not complying with some of the ordinances?
It's never got that far. We've always got compliance before we've used our process that we've handed out, you know, the Board of Building Appeals. We've always got compliance before we had to do that. Residentially, we've done it several times.
Okay. During the process, what other departments are involved in this? The building department,
Okay.
obviously, fire
Right.
department.
When we do our inspections, and the fire chief is here,
Okay.
we go with fire prevention. I usually go. I go. My building inspector goes. If I can't go, he goes for me. Sometimes he's too busy to go. Then I go. So we have one fire prevention guy. We have one code enforcement guy. Sometimes two. We've been bringing the health department with us if it's a restaurant. And now we're starting to bring the sewer department with us because of grease traps and that kind of stuff. Just they want to know what's going in the sewers. So there's a whole team of us.
Thank you. At this time, I'll open this up to any of the committee members that have questions. Good evening, Mr. Silla. How are you?
Good.
How many code enforcement officers do you currently have?
We have 2 full-time and 1 that's not full-time, 4 days a week.
So, almost 3 full-time.
Almost.
How often are the downtown commercial buildings inspected?
Well,
And I say that because I don't know why I have it in my memory, but I feel like I've heard something over the last several years about there being annual inspections downtown.
we don't do annual inspections of commercial buildings. We can't. You know, just trying to count the number of businesses in the city, let alone the downtown area. Downtown area's got almost 90 buildings. You know, start at Erie Street and go east to 27th Street and count the number of businesses along the way. I mean, it's enormous. Plus, we got 10 new businesses on the east side now. So count them and add 10 to that. I mean, there's just no way we can do them all.
And I have that in my head, maybe erroneously, but I felt like that was mentioned when council was talking about the vacant property registration several years back. But if there's no annual inspections, that's fine. Specifically to what Councilman Sloot said regarding our meeting at the end of January, when you mentioned that there were issues with our ordinances or things that needed to be changed in order for you and your staff to get some of these things accomplished. Specifically, what changes to our ordinances would you like to see, or what are things that you feel are precluding you from doing your job that you mentioned a couple weeks ago?
Well, I can tell you this, we're working on things right now. Administration's working on things. Imagine downtown groups working on different things. So, and you guys are going to be working on things. So maybe we can get all these ideas together and get a solution to this problem.
Are there any specific code or ordinances that you can mention that you guys are looking at changing or that we need to think about addressing?
You know, I don't know specifically what you can change to fix this problem. You know, and I'm going to go back to this. If I can make one point across to everybody tonight, there's only so much we can do. It all falls back on the owners. If we don't have owners that are willing to invest in these buildings, you know, what are you going to do? You can only do so much. I mean, we mentioned the white box thing, you know, and I don't know how far you can go with that, but I'll tell you this, there's buildings downtown that don't have electric, that don't have heat, that don't have plumbing.
And that would be considered a code violation, correct?
No, it's not a violation. There's nothing in the building code that forces them to have that. The building code, and I said this the last time, the building's got to be safe and sanitary. But there's nothing that forces them to be habitable. That's the word, habitable. Let's try to find a way to make them habitable.
I agree with you that we are in need of wholesale reinvestment in downtown buildings. When I was the executive director of the Massive Development Foundation, we looked at acquiring 44, 45 properties from a downtown business owner, and unfortunately we couldn't come to terms on price because he was really high and we were reasonable. So I don't disagree with anything you're saying regarding the investment. I appreciate whatever committee the mayor has put forward, but we can have blue ribbon committees till the cows come home. I think we have immediate needs downtown, and this meeting was called because we were led to believe there were some code changes that needed to be made to make those things better now. I don't think we're going to see any significant wholesale reinvestment anytime soon. I think that's a good idea, but putting together a collection of investors is going to take multi-millions of dollars and probably several years. So I'm looking at this from what do we need to do starting today to make sure that, to Mrs. Kramer's point, we don't get to this point with some of our other buildings. So I don't know if it's an inspection issue. I don't know if it's a code issue. We're kind of relying on you to share with us what you think this council can do, to make downtown safer now.
Yeah, it's not an inspection issue. It's not a code issue. And you brought up a good point. There was two groups of investors about 4 or 5 years ago that wanted to buy approximately 40 or 50 buildings. And they had investors, right? They had investors lined up, people ready to invest in the buildings, and they were going to divide them up.
And in my instance, it was primarily the Massive Development Foundation was looking at making a purchase, but the end result
been solved. We wouldn't be here tonight. If that would have happened, this problem would have been solved. You agree?
I think that they would have made a very, very strong attempt at that. However, it's still not an overnight fix, and I don't know if anything really is. I think there are some things we can do. But, you know, waiting for some angel investor to come in and buy downtown and fix it is years off from getting where we need to be. So those are some of my questions. I just hope that if there are some changes, specifically in whatever ordinances we need to make, that we're aware of them and can make those changes. Thank you.
Mr. Lombardi?
Thank you, Mr. Slutz. Mr. Silva, I'm going back to the annual inspections. What would it take for us to be able to do annual inspections? What kind of manpower would we be looking at?
Well, for the code enforcement in the building, probably another building inspector, maybe 4 code enforcement officers, just from the building department standpoint. Now, Chief Hex here, maybe he can chime in on his requirement, what he need for code, for fire prevention.
Sure, Chief.
Because we've talked about this already, and we'd love to do annual inspections, but we don't have the manpower.
Good evening. The question, how many additional fire inspectors?
Yeah, what kind of resources would we need to be able to put this kind of a proactive program together rather than a reactive program that we're using now?
Without really diving into numbers at this point in time, and a very rough estimate, guesstimation, I'd say anywhere between 2 and 5 more fire inspectors along.
Along with Mr. Silva's.
That's in addition to what the building and code enforcement would be.
Now, are there buildings downtown that are getting regularly inspected for fire?
59, Lincoln Way East gets, or 59 Duncan Place, so Lincoln Way East gets inspected relatively often.
Which is what business?
It's the apartment complex there.
Okay, so the residential, the hotel, things like that.
And there's been some issues in the past with the fire pump and the suppressor system, and that's why I've been in there for those places of that nature. Most of what we do outside of what is required on an annual basis, such as the schools, daycare centers, foster homes, is complaint driven, or something that we would catch driving by or being out on another run. And it comes back to the Fire Prevention Bureau, hey, we were out at such and such place, you may want to take a look at this place or this occupancy, this is what we saw, we're not quite sure, but we'll put it in your hands at that point in time. From an annual standpoint, there's just no way that we can hit every commercial business in the city every year. It's just not going to happen. Currently with what we have going.
Okay. Back to Mr. Silva. I guess Mr. Slutz has, opened up this committee meeting to kind of even, I guess to even put it together a wish list for what you could get out of this council. Now, the council can't get you what you were originally asking for as far as, redevelopment, monies and things like that at this point. But you did make mention when you were here the last time that we didn't have laws that you could enforce. And that's what we're kind of trying to drive this to is, what do you need that this council can provide right away to get your job done, to be able to at least put down some prevention to some of these problems. I understand we're looking at buildings that are, very old. When I look at the Tiger Braves building, that has been falling down since I was in high school, okay? And we're talking back in 78 when I started to drive. That's the first time I ever saw that building that was in the shape it is. Here we are, how many years later, and we're finally doing something about it, okay? Are there things that we could have done to prevent that from being, getting to the condition that it was in, or, probably, requiring a tear down earlier?
Councilman, I really don't have a good answer for you on that. We need owners that are willing to preserve these buildings and restore them. Some type of, and you guys had this before, the vacant structure ordinance, something that would force them into not having vacant buildings. These buildings on South Area have been vacant for years, 15, 20 years or more. And there's no penalty to the owners for keeping them vacant. There's no penalty if they don't have heat or electric.
So, can I ask, when we're looking at, and I want to come back to specifically Tiger Regs, that building, the problems were foundational there, correct?
The building imploded originally at the roof level. It fell through down to and it crashed the second floor down to the first floor. And then they put a Band-Aid on it. They put those cables in it and held it together, and that lasted 7 or 8 years. And now it finally started to lean.
But would you say it was structurally in the foundation that was causing the problems with that building? I mean, a building like that, I don't know that restoration would have done anything. They would almost have to excavate underneath to get that building to stand again.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it was a structural for the foundation of the footers, the foundation. I think that was all good. I think the roof leaked and it imploded the building. And water's the worst problem you can have. That's.
That's all I have, Mr. Susan.
Thank you, Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Sloot. So, Chapter 1330, the registration of non-owner occupied rental structures. This was passed in 2014, so I believe this was part of the rental registration that encompassed both residential and commercial, right?
Correct.
So, there's a registration that is submitted by the owner of a commercial building as well, right?
Correct.
Is there an inspection at the time of that registration?
No.
I was a policeman for 22 years in the city of Massillon.
Okay.
So, I would go out and enforce the laws, and we issued citations, and they would have to go to court. How do we, I'm assuming your job, that you're enforcing these building codes. At what point can we summon these people in court? Let the court system and make them put a court order in saying they have to do this, or there's going to be other repercussions. How do we go about that? Or is that in place now?
Yes, it's in place. I mean, we usually, like I've said before, we get compliance before we get to that point. We kind of, let me give you an example of an Apple building. Okay, we ordered it down and we had non-compliance. Okay, he appealed it and he went right to the State Board of Building Appeals. So we went to the state and he lost his appeal there, and that was the end of it. If he would have not taken it down at that time, well, the city ended up taking it down, but it would have went to the courts. Our next step is to go to the law director, and then he sends out letters and does whatever he does, and then he takes it from that point on. But we for the most part, get compliance. But it's just the minimum compliance that you can get.
Mr. Rich, you have a question?
Yeah, I just have two things here that have been spoken. One, make comment that it's not a code issue, and I think that the underlying thing is what we're saying here is, I believe it is, and you already hit on it, and I can't understand why we wouldn't put it in our code that all commercial buildings must be habitable. How are we going to have an ordinance that penalizes someone for vacant buildings, but then also not even have a minimum standard being habitable?
Let's do it.
I mean, that seems to be the most logical first step, saying all commercial buildings must be able to have a business being occupied in them. Otherwise, why are we charging people vacant? So, I mean,
Okay, while you're there, are we just talking about the first floor, or are we talking the first, second, and third floor?
I think that's what we end up having to go into, right? I mean, that's probably that next conversation, that next level conversation.
Or maybe you start on the first floor, and then maybe the second year they,
I would assume that at least at the very minimum, we say, okay, what's our vacancy? You have a vacancy, you can have so much vacant versus occupied. We have to have at least that much habitable, because otherwise they can't even meet vacancy requirements. Does that make sense? Just wait.
A quick question. So to add Mr. Lewis's point, would the whole building have to be quote unquote habitable in order for you to issue a occupancy permit?
no. You know, all these buildings downtown, it's,
So I could get an occupancy permit to rent a first floor with storefront downtown when the second and third floors are in disarray.
it's not habitable. Yeah. Yes,
Not habitable in what exactly? I mean, so let's say I had a 3-story building down there and I put a retail space in the first floor. The second and third floors, I'm not going to rent them out, you know, some places do. I wouldn't be renting them out. What if I wanted to use them just for storage for my business's use? When you're saying habitable, you know, would that include that storage space, or would we, you know, I mean, I would think before we issue the occupancy permit, and correct me if I'm wrong, whether it's for the first floor retail or not, that the second and third floor have to pass regulation, you know, building regulations as well, regardless of what they're used for.
what we normally do, Councilman, is we go to the second, third floor and make sure that they're cleaned out, that there's no debris or garbage up there, and as long as they're clean
And structurally sound.
and structurally sound, we go up to the third floor and make sure the roof's not leaking, those kind of things, and if that's the case, then we issue the certificate for the first floor. You know, there's very few businesses that are using the second floor for storage. I mean, they're usually all down on the first floor. Now, there's one or two of them that are.
So do they normally leave those spaces empty then? Just
They're normally empty. And I'll tell you this, that some of these buildings, like 10, I wish you guys could go up there because you're going to see the original hotel that was there in the early 1900s. You see the original wallpaper. There's about 10 rooms with 1 bathroom, because that's how they used to do it back there. That building hasn't been touched for that long. So, and all we do is make sure they're cleaned out and make sure they're safe for the firefighters. If they go up there, we don't want them tripping over garbage. That's why they come with us.
So my second question for consideration would be, while I agree attempting to do a more proactive inspection routine, instead of going annual because of the manpower concerns, could we come up with a graded system where if they come through the inspection at one level, we know we don't have to come back for 4, maybe 5 years. If they're at another level, we're coming back next year to make sure that you're making reasonable progress. Something like that, and then that way we can decrease the manpower requirements, but still have a good expectation on the property owner of where their building is and what needs to be done.
That's probably a good idea. I mean, you know, we do the inspection, we issue the certificate of occupancy, and we pretty well know the buildings that are good and bad. And from that point on, it's pretty much complaint driven. Now, we did just go through, we just got about 6 or 7 new businesses in the downtown area, you know, that State Farm for stuff, and then around the corner, there's a nail place, then across the street. So we just recently just went through those buildings.
I think a great system would not only be able to assist with manpower, but it also give us, when we have questions, hey, how many buildings are at B? How many buildings are at A? Now you come with quantifiable data, and we're able to then extrapolate from that how much of an investment the city needs to make for further regulation and support. Right now, all we know is, well, we know we have a few bad ones and a few good ones, so at least with a grade structure that will build us out for success. Again, to Mr. Herndon's point, it may not be a right now answer, but at least it starts to put us on the right road.
Right, that's a good idea. We just got to get there every one of them again. That's kind of our plan, to visit them all again.
Mr. Herndon? Thank you. The grading idea is a good idea. Also, maybe we look at buildings within the downtown commercial district are inspected once every 3 years, just for argument's sake. Is it possible, can these commercial inspections be outsourced on a case-by-case basis? Are there any other entities that do inspections that we could pay on a per building or per inspection thing as opposed to additional employees to keep our current staff doing what they're doing and then looking at downtown as a district a little differently?
I'm not in favor of that. If we're going to outsource it, just give us the manpower to do it ourselves. That's my feelings on that. And I don't know of any.
And I don't mean outsourcing like outsourcing your job. I'm saying,
Oh, I understand.
and it probably came across that way, and I apologize. I guess I'm thinking is instead of bringing in additional staff, are there companies, entities, folks that could be contracted with to provide those inspections under your supervision?
I'm sure there are, like, maybe, I'll just give you an example here, like, maybe Coon Restorations will go in and, since that's what they specialize in, historical buildings, maybe they'll go in and they'll do a write-up on the building for a certain amount of money. That's an idea.
Thank you.
Mrs. Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Swenson. Is it normal to inspect buildings every 3 or 4 years? What do other municipalities do? Do they have annual inspections on these downtown buildings?
For other cities?
Are we just behind, or is that the norm for other cities to inspect whenever they get, around to it?
Well, I did check with Canton, I talked to the ex-building official over there, and they do not do annual inspections, they never did. They're pretty much on the same level as us. It's pretty much complaint driven, and, we did all our downtown buildings in 2018, we swept the whole downtown. Took us 6 months, and it's such a process to do the inspection. First, you gotta get with the owner, you gotta get permission, you gotta get with the landlord, then we gotta get our group together, our team together, and then we do the inspection. And then we write it up, we write the citations up, we get them out to the owners, and then we give them a certain amount of time to correct the citations, then we go back, and sometimes we gotta go back twice, and then we can final them out. But it's a whole big process to do a building. But to answer your question is no, there's very few cities around that do annuals that can get to every commercial building, and every commercial industrial building in the cities. It's a massive job. I wish we could do it.
Okay, so when you mentioned, a citation and putting a Band-Aid, they clean it up, they put a Band-Aid. Expand on what's considered a Band-Aid, just to give me some
It's the
examples
minimum,
of what
and
we're saying.
I should say Band-Aid, we get the minimum.
Which is, I'm ignorant, so,
All right, so the roof's leaking, okay? Maybe it needs a new roof. We get a bucket of tar. We get a maintenance guy up there sealing it with a bucket of tar. We get the minimum.
so if we would proceed with discussion about possibly the first level having it, raising the bar and having utilities or whatever, and we were thinking of not doing something on, the second floor and the third floor. When those roofs leak, isn't that like a trickle-down effect? Ultimately, the third floor is going to be damaged, then the second floor, and then ultimately it'll hit the first floor. So is that a good approach to take on buildings if we're going to get most for our buck, like we want these structures sound?
They have the citation if the roof's leaking, they fix that citation. It might not be the way we want it fixed, but they stop the leak.
So are there things that we can state if we proceed with ordinance that we want them fixed by A, B, and C? I mean, spell out how to achieve that instead of just putting a bucket of tar on something which isn't up to our standard. Maybe raise our standards?
Yeah, we can do things like that. Maybe we can order a roof contractor to go up there, do a roof inspection and certify it. That's one thing that we could do. And water is the ultimate cause of this, of all the damage. When the roof's leaking, you got problems. That's what happened at 14, or Old Tiger Rags down there. That's what happened there. And, water damage was the cause, so I think it's 20. I think, there's been other hearsay, I can't say, but we think water was the problem.
So possibly our first approach would be something with like the roof.
Yeah, maybe.
Getting specifics on how to correct these citations based on language that's.
There you go. That might be a good idea, have a certified roof contractor certify the roof. Since water is the ultimate problem, that might be a good idea. And we thought about that.
I think moving forward, I mean, we're just beginning these conversations, but I think having specific language based on removing the Band-Aid, but fixing these buildings structurally, how to enforce these things.
But then, we get back to, and this is fine, a roof is $100,000 on some of these commercial buildings, or $200,000, so we got a roof contractor comes in and says you need a new roof. Now, we give the order to the owner, install a new roof. They're costly.
Thank you.
Mr. Lamar?
Thank you, Mr. Sleuth. Don't we have a minimum building code that you can enforce? Even off the Ohio State code? I mean, I managed hotels for years. Okay, if I had a leaky roof and I put a bucket of tar on the roof, they would have taken my occupancy permit. Okay, when we needed a roof, we had to have the entire roof done. We had a flat roof too, which was even more of a pain, but we had to have the entire roof done. It had to meet the building code when it came back for inspection. It had to meet the building code.
Right, and you have to stop the leak. Whether you use tar or Flex Seal fixes everything. But there's nothing that forces them to put a new roof on. You have to, roofs can be repaired. That gets back to what Councilman Kramer said. Maybe we ought to order that. Maybe that's one thing we can do is order a certified roofing contractor in there. Because we can't get up on most of these roofs. They're 3 stories up. They go up with bucket trucks or extension lines.
So you're inspecting from the inside then?
For the most part, we're inspecting from the inside. Now, I have the younger inspector, and he did crawl up on a roof the other day. I worried about him. What's up there?
Yeah.
Mr. Murphy?
Thank you. Is there a difference between an occupancy permit and a building permit?
Yes, a building permit is issued if they're going to do building renovations or new buildings.
So that's for work to be done, right? So an occupancy, I guess so an occupancy permit would be required from a business owner to open up in that location.
Right, we just had those businesses downtown State Farm and next to it.
They got occupancy permits.
They got occupancy.
Is there an expiration date on that?
No.
Okay, so what would happen if we issued occupancy permits in periods of time, let's say 3 to 5 years, and require an inspection to renew the permit? So the situation I see is if you get an occupancy permit, city, they pay their fee, the city gives them a permit. I think that's probably how we've gotten into trouble over the years because there's been no mechanism to require. I think people probably take that for granted. I think if you're talking about a way to incentivize some of these downtown property owners, if I'm a business or business owners, if I'm a business owner and I know that I have an occupancy permit for a period of 3 years, and I know that within the last 6 months of my term, so to speak, I know I'm going to have another inspection from the city in order to get that permit renewed for another 3 years. I'm probably going to take better care of the building and not let things go and just wait for things to happen. Would you be opposed to looking at something like that?
No, that's another good idea. I mean, there's been a lot of good ideas here. We just got to put them all together and figure something out.
To me, that makes sense. That's one of the things we should maybe have further conversation on, is looking at these in intervals of a period of years, requiring inspections so that we can say, you don't just get your permit and away you go, and we'll deal with you in 10 years when the building's going to fall down. I think that's probably a good mechanism for the downtown. I think that's good for everyone, but I'm making notes of all. I think we have several, at least half a dozen or so action items for further discussion, so thank you for answering my question.
Thank you. Mr. Sneed.
Thank you, Mr. Slutz. I just wanted to make a comment and wisely caution council moving forward. There's an old adage, every finger you point, there's 3 pointing back at you. My concern is, and I got to bring it up, but at the street department, that building is quite old, and I am definitely afraid that our salt dome, that's over 100 years old, and that salt dome is leaning. And I would hate to not say something and then hear, hey, we got a snowstorm, there was a loader that pushed up against the pillar and the salt dome collapsed because it's not up to code. So I just wanted to, more so than.
Go ahead.
As far as the salt dome itself, that has been addressed, it's being looked into by Operations Superintendent Burdiser. I don't quite know where the status is of it, but they have made movement, progress towards that.
Right. And he also cleared out a storage building, which now all the equipment is outside, and filled that, but we put a concrete block on the inside edges of that. Well, if water gets, you said water was the cause of all of this, or a lot of this. I can see the iron, the steel being eroded as well. So I just have some concerns to our own buildings. If we're going to uphold a higher standard to these privately owned buildings, we need to hold ourselves accountable as well. And that's the only comment I'm going to grab on. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from council members? Due to the time restraints we have, I'm going to wrap up this evening's meeting. I think we have a lot of good points. A lot of the members made some good points. And I think at some point we need to have another meeting to address some of these other issues. Like I told you, we are here to help you. We want to make things easier for you. And your input is very important to us so we can come up with a plan to make your job easier and more effective.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I hope I helped you.
With that being said, also for the public, you'll be able to speak on number 17 in next meeting here at 6:30. Thank you.